is going to come and speak about sensuality and love, and you're going to break down the Song of Solomon today.
Yeah. So we get started on that. I wanted to express something from the Israelite culture, but I want to bring it back to an indigenous perspective. A lot of times, the way that we view or perceive things is based on a Western paradigm that is, foreign to us and has been epigenetically forced upon us. So growing up and culturated into a different society, we tend to adopt the values of those who are oppressing us, right? Or those who are trying to control us and use us as a human resource or a battery to fuel their agenda, right, and their program. So what we have to do is find a way to flush this propaganda that's being directed towards us, so that way we can start thinking intrinsically and then be able to express it extrinsically. One thing from culture that I've learned is that the ancestors have always leaves behind a blueprint and an ancient landmark for you to get back, right? So the blueprint is designed to build a ship, the compass is designed to give you direction, and the tools are designed to build something once you get there, and that would be the blueprint. So once we understand that, the objective is, well, what cultural elements have our ancestors left behind? So that way we can utilize that and we could transform it into a model that can resolve societal ills that we face every day. One of those things is the position of perspective. How do we perceive these two words from our indigenous perspective as opposed to the Western perspective? And when we start to understand that, we will be more inclined to choose the native element and reject the foreign, because the purpose of culture is to protect those who have created it, or those who have been designed for, so that way they can acknowledge the foreign entities that are trying to usurp and overthrow it. And once you have culture that has been handed down from your ancestors that you are now installing into your everyday life, you'll start to see that you'll start to be able to identify foreign threats that are seeking to either usurp it, co-opt with it, or remove it from out of your possession. And that's one thing that once you're enlightened, we have to resist or buck against to ensure that our future generations are not afflicted like we are. So we have that obligation to them. So the reason why I say this is because we have to be able to study what paradigm has been placed upon us. And what I want to go to is I want us to look into what's called the Romantic era, right? I'm going to read something real quick, and then I'm going to transition from that into what I want to put forth. So the first thing is, this is from a .edu website, right? This is from a college website, and it's actually explaining what the Romantic era is, right? It says, by the late 18th century in France and Germany, literary taste began to now, just so you know, the age of reason, or the age of enlightenment is what they call it, is all of this is just a revitalization or resurrection of classical Greek or Greco-Roman ideals and knowledge and understanding, right? And they just took that as a template and they built upon it, right? But by the late 18th century in France and Germany, literary taste began to turn from classical and neoclassical conventions. The generation of revolution and wars, of stress and upheaval, had produced doubts of the security of the age of reason. Doubts and pessimism now challenged the hope and optimism of the 18th century. Men felt a deepened concern for the metaphysical problems of existence, death, and eternity. It was in this setting that Romanticism was born. Romanticism was a literary movement that swept through virtually every country of Europe, the United States, and Latin America that lasted from about 1750 to 1870. However, the Romantic movement did not reach France until the 1820s. Romanticism's essential spirit was one of revolt against an established order of things, against precise rules, laws, dogmas, and formulas that characterize classicism in general and late 18th century neoclassicism in particular. It praised imagination over reason, emotions over logic, and intuition over science, making way for a vast body of literature and great sensibility and passion. Now, that's one thing that I think people really they use it, but it's a misnomer, right? So It's a word that they think it means one thing, but it actually means something else. And we'll go in and we'll be able to qualify what it is that I'm talking about when we look into words such as the word passion that's there. But bear that in mind, or keep that in mind. In their choice of heroes, also the romantic writers replaced the static universal types of classical 18th century literature with more complex idiosyncratic characters. They became preoccupied with the genius, the hero, and the exceptional figure in general. This is all important because when you think a knight in shining armor, this is where all this is coming from, right? They became preoccupied with the genius, the hero, the exceptional figure in general, and a focus on his passions and inner struggles. And there was an emphasis on the examination of human personality and its moods and mental potentialities. The term romantic first appeared in 18th century English and originally meant romance-like, that is, resembling the fanciful character of medieval romances. But we all want romance. That's interesting. But a mood or movement whose central characteristic is revolt and whose stress is on self-expression and individual uniqueness does not lend itself to precise definition. Among the characteristic attitudes of romanticism were the following: libertarianism. Many of the libertarian and abolitionist movements of the late 18th and early 19th centuries were engendered by the Romantic philosophy, the desire to be free of convention and tyranny, and the new emphasis on the rights and dignity of the individual. Just as the insistence on rational, formal, and conventional subject matter that has typified neoclassicism was reversed, the authoritarian regimes that had encouraged and sustained neoclassicism in the arts were inevitably subjected to popular revolutions. The general romantic's dissatisfaction with the organization of society was often channeled into specific criticism of the bourgeois society, and the feeling of oppression was frequently expressed in poetry. Political and social causes became dominant themes in romantic poetry and prose throughout France and other parts of Europe, producing many vital documents that are still pertinent. We'll go to the next one. The lure of the exotic. In the spirit of their new freedom, romantic writers in all cultures expanded their imaginary horizons spatially and chronologically. They turned back to the Middle Ages, 12th century to 15th century, for themes and settings, and had an obsessive interest in folk culture, national and ethnic cultural origins. They found delight notions of romantic love, mystery, and superstition, and placed emphasis upon imagination as a gateway to transcendent experience and spiritual truth. What I'm saying here is extremely important, because if we're going to speak about the words sensuality and love, which are words that are really foreign to indigenous cultures, these are constructs that were placed so that it can fit in a framework. That's like taking a puzzle piece and trying to force it somewhere. That's pretty much what's going on. And we're wondering why we don't have close-knit families anymore. We're wondering why the bonds that we try to establish with one another is not successful, because the way that we create them is based on a paradigm that did not have us in mind. And it becomes very dangerous because it's something that, like we were reading, becomes very imaginary and not really materialized. And then that starts to affect the way we treat each other, because we start to seek for something in somebody else's culture that has nothing to do with us. And therefore, if we're trying to look for a solution in the culture of somebody else, because remember, culture is the immune system of a people. It's there to protect you from any foreign influences seeking to come in, taking parts of it and building something for itself. So now if we are people that have been oppressed and displaced from our original culture, and we've been forced into a construct that's not ours, and we're trying to pull from that construct's culture in order for us to have an identity and use that identity to create relative bonds amongst each other, it will be unsuccessful, because that original culture was not designed for those people who are displaced, that are trying to take from it in order to form their own identity and their own reality that then can be an actuality. And the difference between reality and actuality is a reality is the way your perception is based on the material and the abstract world around you. And actuality is when you're able to put yourself into your reality and actually make things occur. So a lot of times people will live in a reality of what's going on around them, but can never change what's going on around them. All they can do is just be a
Right.
puppet to a puppet master, as a puppet master is playing them along into the stage that they have created for them. Now, the reason why I'm laying this foundation first is because when you understand the roots of romanticism, you understand words such as romance and where the word romance comes from. And we, as a melanated people, are trying to seek romance amongst each other when this concept was foreign to us. We will never be able to get that. It's like, watching a cartoon and saying, oh, I want to jump into the screen and be a character in a cartoon. That's just not going to happen. So what you do is, because you cannot be a character in the cartoon, you start to create a cartoon reality in your own environment so you can envision yourself as being in that cartoon. But you will never, ever be able to be that character that you're seeking for. And the reason why this is important, because we have these imaginations of what we want our significant others to be and to do. And these things are out of place of who we are as a people. So I say this to lay the foundation that once you understand that romanticism is something that's entrenched in medieval idealism and medieval philosophy, that is nothing but a regurgitation and revitalization of classical Greco-Roman understanding, thought, etc. Now, when we talk about love and sensuality, we have to redefine these terms so that way we can have a more indigenous perspective of what it is. And then we can find a way to implement it so that way we can yield results. Because you have a situation where you have a Black community that's the highest in divorce, the highest in single mother homes. Now the state is actually contributing to that, because when mothers are on welfare, they get more when there's no male in the house, right? Then you get TV shows that teach the strong Black woman that came from the feminist movement that then infiltrated the Black nationalist movement to empower the women and say, well, you don't need the Black man. And the reason why that was designed is because they were getting funded. When people look at the feminist movement, don't look at the figureheads, look at the funding. And we tend to miss that. And those people that fund that are still there today. Then we have Planned Parenthood. We have all these other things that the state and society is implementing. But the way that we fall short is that instead of us trying to go back and look for that culture that we lost, we tried to create a culture and an amalgamated system that was not designed for us to be prosperous or successful in. Then that's why you start to get shows like Love and Hip Hop. I mean, if I was somebody that was a foreigner, and look at this. If I was somebody that was a foreigner and I came here to America and I didn't know nothing about Black people, and somebody showed me, like, I wanted to know what's the ideal of love when it comes to the Black community, and somebody put on Love and Hip Hop, and I was to watch Love and Hip Hop, I would say, wow, this is really dysfunctional. Where's the love at? It was like, every time I watch Love and Hip Hop, I never see the love. I see drama, right? I see lust, but I never see genuine love. It's not there. Because what we're trying to do is we're trying to take on the mantle of the European construct of what romance is, and that was not designed for us. That's why we cannot be successful with these things. And all society wants to do is show and prove that those people do not know how to create these lifelong bonds. Because when we look at the current state of our society today with our people, we'll use a show like Love and Hip Hop, we'll get people to gravitate towards that. Then they'll start to reflect that which they're gravitating towards. And then when foreigners come over here to look and examine Black people, we wonder why they want to keep a distance from us, because they love the things that we were able to create in our captive state, but they don't want to identify with that because there's a degree of stigma that comes along with it. So now that I've laid that out for us so we can understand how the European has created a construct that is not fit for us to survive, but all it's done is to divide and conquer us as a people, let's revert back to some material that was left behind by our ancestors. So I'm saying this because, there are many different sects and groups that's in the conscious community. And I've studied for years, every sect, their paradigm, their perspective, and I respect it. I don't have to disrespect somebody else's culture in order for me to big up my own, right? So the reason why I say this is because my approach now is going to be based upon my perspective from my cultural paradigm that can also be generally used for people of color, right? Because it's coming from a source of people of color, right? Contrary to popular belief.
Correct.
So when we go back to sensuality and love, let's go back and define sensuality. Let's go back and define love. And what we're going to do is that we're going to look at cultural literature by some ancestors that left this behind as a blueprint or a template for us to build upon. So that way we have the appropriate way of defining what this is. So before I get into the English definition of sensuality and the English definition of love, I want to look up the Hebrew definition of love. The Hebrew definition of love is ahab. Ahab consists of three consonants, right? Aleph, hey, and bait. The reason why this is important is because in the pictographic form, or what's called the Paleo-Hebrew, each consonant was not abstract. It was a concrete item that can be found in the immediate environment. And this is also readily known to people who study the Medu-Neter, right? When you go and look at the hieroglyphics, which Europeans call it hieroglyphy, we call it the Medu-Neter, you see images of things that's in the immediate environment. And that language has a data bank that is based on all the available literature that's available and all of the characters that can come out of that literature that's available. They codify it, they classify it, they categorize it, and then they put it in a dictionary or a lexicon so you can pull from it. So in regards to the Hebrew language has 20 X amount of characters. It used to be one or two more, then it was shortened. But each one of these characters was not abstract. Like today, you have the letter A. The letter A doesn't represent anything, right? The letter A is just a bunch of lines. But if you look for its equivalent in Hebrew, you have the Aleph, and the Aleph represented the ox head, right? Just like you'll see the ox head, just like you can see its cognate in the Medu-Neter as well as other indigenous languages. So the ox head represented strength, right? It represented leadership. The reason why it represented leadership is because what the pastoralists would do is that they would take a older, mature ox and they would yoke him up with a younger, inexperienced ox. And the reason for that is because the inexperienced ox will only do but so much because he is yoked to the more mature ox. And the more mature ox is the one that's being rewarded for its behavior. And then the younger ox starts to mirror that behavior so it can receive the same rewards. But how does that translate? Now, I'm just diverging for a second. How does that translate to our community today? A lot of the youth do not want to be yoked up with people who are much older than them, right? Because they believe that there's a different status quo to be popular or accepted in society today, which they don't realize that they suffer more penalties and consequences, adverse consequences, because society does not reward a strong Black family, a strong Black male, a strong Black female. They don't reward those things. That to them reminds them of resistance. It reminds them of something that they're trying to avoid and something they're trying to control, because if it becomes free again, or it's a degree, obtains a degree of liberty, then they will no longer have any kind of control over us. So what it tends to do is teach the youth that you don't need to listen to your elders. And this is what they say, because they have failed you. Right? If all the elders had failed the youth, there'd be no youth here today. So you got to consider just common sense. If all the elders failed the youth, there'd be no youth here today. But youth are still here today. Somebody's raising these kids so that way you're there. Now, they may not have as many resources that you do because you have more access to things, but they've done what they could based on the conditions that they were placed in. And the good thing is there's still some degree of wisdom that they possess that you can still gravitate towards, because if you yoke yourself up to learn what those who are older and more mature of you are or have experienced, then those are less mistakes that you have, and you get to increase your rate of survivability in a society that is oppressing you, right? So the reason why the Alex is there for leaders, because it's leading the young, inexperienced ox that is yoked with, but it's also has brute strength. And then you look at the next character, which would be the hay, and the hay represents a man with his hands up, beholding a sight. Then the last letter is the bait, which means a house. So this is the three consonants that when they are syntaxed together or arranged together, morphologically speaking, you get an expression from those three concrete characters that are linked together. So looking at it from now, I'm interpreting this from a more subjective perspective. But if you look at the Aleph or the Ox head, you look at the man standing with his hands up, beholding a sight, and you look at the bait for the house. Ahab means the strength you get from looking over your home, or those things that you would consider to be your tribe, your family, or your community. You derive
Wow.
strength when you look over your home. And that is why our community is so jacked up. It's because nobody is taking into account that the home is the first foundation. When the youth go outside the home and they look for love, they look for attention, they look for affection, what you're doing is the youth is no longer drawing strength from looking over the home. They're drawing strength from running away from the home, because
From the
because they don't
home.
feel a degree of
Right.
security, they don't feel a degree of order and structure, these things are not there. So the parents or older siblings are not deriving strength from looking over the needs of the home. Once the needs are met, the needs create a foundation so you can obtain the wants. But if the needs are not met, all you're going to be doing in this pyramid hierarchy of leaving from a base state of just survival to a state of self-actualization, where you're actually carrying out your divine assignment here on the earth, you'll continue to fight down here because you never learned in life that the structure or the base of the pyramid or the cornerstone first comes with taking care of the needs. How can you obtain the necessary resources? By creating the necessary bonds in order to secure the foundation, so there you can build upon, right? So once we understand that that's the definition of love, and we understand why the Black community is jacked up, is because we no longer have that indigenous definition of love. It is no longer drawing strength from looking over the home. It's drawing strength from things that are outside the home, and that creates, right? So that is the Hebrew
Awesome.
definition of love from an indigenous perspective. Now, once you start to look at the word love, when we go to the English definition, we have something that's a little bit more different, right? This one again is the connotation that was added to it comes from the age of romanticism that I just mentioned earlier, right?
Romanticism. Oh,
So yeah,
yes.
there you go.
Right.
It's imaginary. It's not nothing that is tangible. It's something that you always will imagine, but you'll never actually live it out. And what the oppressor does is that he continues to put you in a state of imagination, because as long as you're imagining something, the less you'll actually be doing, right? And that's what philosophy does,
Correct.
because those who are the philosophers who initiate philosophy, and philo meaning love from the Greek, and Sophie meaning wisdom, love of wisdom. And what they would do is they would go and look for things that help them to actualize abstract thoughts or ideas to give them a sense of purpose, because these people were not original to a lot of the areas in which they conquered. And because of their original environment, they lacked the resources in order to sustain themselves to a point where they can then focus on the spiritual element of building the interior man so he can reflect the outside. So because their resources were scarce, and because there was a lot of fighting amongst them, what they started to do was relate from man to object and seek out objects that would be necessary for their survival, right? So what those of us who were in an environment that was more sustainable, and we had more of a spiritual code of ethics that was sustaining our vitality or our strength, we did not have to relate to objects because we had them. Therefore, we can focus on the relationships we had with each other. So, and this is what I'm saying is not nothing that's new. That actual concept or that model actually comes from two good authors that I've listened to along the years, Dr. Frances Cress Welsing, that I know you're familiar with, and also with Dr. Joy DeGruy. All right. She wrote a book on post-traumatic slavery disorder.
Right.
Right. And they actually explain a lot of these
Yes.
elements. You know what I'm saying? It's the genetic survival element that you get from Dr. Frances Cress Welsing, and then the man to object, man to man relationship that you get from Dr. Joy DeGruy. So once you understand that that this sense of imagination philosophy was designed in order for the survival of a people that did not have resources, because they had to continuously imagine having something to drive them to be successful, as opposed to people that did have things, and because they did not have a similar drive, they can focus on the relationships of one another. You understand the displacement between the two worldviews. All right. So moving past that, the definition for love, a general definition for love in the English language, is an intense feeling of deep affection. Now, intense feeling of deep affection, that is one of many definitions for this word love. But I chose that specifically because that relates closely to what we're going to see in this literature. But I want to show people something so they can understand before you can even get love. And there's different types of love, right? There's a love that you show from husband to wife, or male to female. There's a love you show from mother to child, father to child. There's a love that you show within a family unit, like a brother and sister. And then there's an erotic type of love. So there's different types of love. And one thing that I can give credit, a small amount of credit, to the Greek language, is that they were able to classify love in several different categories, right? You have storge love, you have eros love, you have philos love, you have agape love. So you have different types of love, right? But the most important thing is, in order for you to get this intense feeling of deep affection, and since we're mentioning sensuality, the way that you can truly feel love is you have to be able to experience it via sensuality. And once we get the definition of sensuality, then we'll be able to understand what is actually transpiring, right? So a good definition for sensuality that I was able to see to help us flow through this literature and be able to identify it from our indigenous perspective is the condition of being pleased or fulfilled through the senses. So sensory fulfillment, and sensory fulfillment must be holistic, because if your sensuality is only derived from a few of those senses, then you are never really truly experiencing what love is. And once those senses are saturated, the only thing that is left, if you're looking to climax, is you have to focus on what we all perceive as the sixth sense. This type of sense that you get that is indifferent of the five senses that you possess. And the only way to really climax, when you get to the peak of what love is that you have to saturate these senses so much in the appropriate way that it drives you to the sixth sense that is indifference of the other five senses, but you get to unlock it because you have appropriately fulfilled all of these senses. And then you can step to the next stage or transition to really that deep, intense feeling that is something that you don't get from any external sensory organs, but it's something that is only felt on a level that is only cognizant to people who are human beings that are endowed with consciousness, right? And I hope I'm not saying too much. I hope everybody's following where I'm going, right?
No, I'm with you.
Okay, cool.
Everybody there? We all.
All right, awesome. All right. So the literature that I'm going to provide helps us to outline these things. And this is something that I threw together real quick. Actually, I threw it together today, right? Because I was really busy the past couple of weeks. But I threw it together today because I already had the concept in my mind, but I didn't just write it out. But I wrote it out and I said, okay, look, you know what? Let me go ahead and just lay this out so that way people have a point of reference for what I'm talking about from one of many cultural paradigms, right? So when we leave the romanticism and we defined love as a intense feeling of deep affection, and this is an intense feeling that you have that is indifferent of your five senses, the only way to peak or to climax or to obtain that is that you have to appropriately fulfill or satisfy the sensory organs to the point where the only other way to experience a person comes on a spiritual plane. It's a different frequency that is not reached unless you're able to get it to that point, right? And once you get to that point, then there's certain things that come along that manifest as love, because love is not an object that can be weighed or tested in a lab. right? And it differs from culture to culture depending upon what those cultures value. Worth is only based on what you place value on and what you associate value with. And if you misappropriate what you value, then you're going to be disconnected from what value should be. Value should be anything that reflects intrinsically what you are. And if you have something that can reflect intrinsically what you are, then it is only a mere reflection of what is inside that is being placed outside. So I'll give you an example of what I mean. When you look at what's called precious metals, these metals are precious because the properties that these metals contain is something that is similar to the properties that we as human beings contain. And the things that we as human beings try to obtain. And once you understand this, then you can start to realize, wow, the reason why this thing actually has value to me is because it is a reflection to intrinsically what I am. So that's why I tell people anything that you place value on is going to tell me what you're really made of. You ask somebody, what do you value? They'll tell you what it is, and then you'll know what's going on inside of them. Right. So if you ask somebody, what do you value, and then point to the car, then you understand that this person is fast. So you may want to stay away from them. You know what I'm saying? So, okay, that's what they value. This person is fast. They like to go here and here and run and then they like to show off and stuff like that. And then if you ask somebody else, well, what do you value? And they point to their children, then I know, okay, you're looking for perpetuity, for something that is perpetual, that is a reflection of yourself that will continue to live on by means of the way that you express this degree of value towards those children, right? So this is just helping us to differentiate between the two, depending upon the way that you properly interview people to bring it out. So when we go into the literature, and I end off with the literature, and I was trying not to be long with this, but we're gonna end off with the literature.
Take your time.
Yeah, we're gonna end off with the literature. When we go into the Song of Solomon's, this is I'm not going to say it's a poem, but it's written almost like in a poetical form. And pretty much what it's outlining is the sensuality and love between two different individuals, right? And these individuals come from two different worlds, right? But when you read it, a lot of times people get lost in the romanticism of the text, that they actually miss out on the sensuality aspect and they miss out on the love aspect, or they place more value on their imagination of what the sensual aspect is and what the love aspect is, right? But when you read this in ancient times, the strength comes from looking over the home, you have to make sure that everyone in a home, their needs are being met, right? And those needs, typically there's a template of needs, but then also needs can grow over time and they can change over time, right? Depending upon the circumstances, the situation, the environment, et cetera, et cetera. So as somebody drawing strength from the home, in order for you to have a power source to draw strength from, you have to ensure that that meter that you're using is as full as it can be. And sometimes that can be tough because, this life is not easy, right? But if life was easy, then you will never have personality, right? Challenges is what brings about character. And if you always run away from a challenge instead of running through it, then you can never have the character necessary for sustainability in anything that you encounter, because your endurance was not going to be there, and endurance and persistency is necessary in order for something to get to the finish line. So when we read the story, we're dealing with sensuality from the definition of sensuality, right? I wanted to go into the etymology of sensual and love, but we can probably do that if we have more time towards the end. But let me work through the literature, because I said I want to choose this because this so happens to be something that is deemed as being romantic and deemed as being passionate. Now, we use that word passionate a lot, and let me show you why that word is dangerous. Passionate, by definition, means a strong and barely controllable emotion. Exactly, because people say, we say in the conscious community, emotions is energy in motion, right? Imagine if you have a strong current that is uncontrollable. That was shock and killer. That's like a bolt of lightning, right? Strong and barely controllable, and it's random, and it just, once it hits something, it causes damage. That is what passion
And it
is.
does.
You tell somebody, man, I love this person with passion. I'm like, whoa, hold on, because
Ooh,
sometimes if
whoa.
passion is not transmuted properly, it can turn into something that's adverse, like rage, because you've never learned how
Yes.
to discipline the energy that you're putting in motion. You're just letting it go unbridled. And when you do that, you can cause damage. This is why, even in our everyday life, there's a specification for every electrical device. So that way there's an operating temperature, there's an operating frequency. And the reason for that is so that it can deduce or minimize the amount of damage it can cause if something happens. So we live our lives
Correct.
with objects in our environment that are regulated to ensure that energy is not out of control. But when it comes to our own personal energy, we allow it to be unbridled. And we wonder why there's so much damage when we love too hard. That's what we say. We love too hard. There should be no need to
Right.
love hard unless that hardening is the foundation, but love should be malleable to a point where it can withstand the amount of energy that's coming in it and the energy that's coming out of it, right? So,
Out of it.
and I
Yeah.
know I'm saying a lot, but I'm honing in. I'm honing in, right?
No.
Um,
I'm there.
so passion is something we should refrain from because it can also mean suffering. It can also mean a struggle. So energy that is in struggle, energy that is suffering, or energy that is uncontrollable. None of these things is the ideal environment that you want to place a home in. You want to place a relationship in. You don't want to do that, right? So when we understand
Right.
this, as far as passion, now passion can be good for other things. For example, I can have a passion to fix my community, meaning
Right.
I will continue to allow my fervence to be strong and barely controllable because when I come against resistance from the oppressive force,
Correct.
now in a relationship in a home is not the battlefield. That is the healing grounds
Correct.
for the battlefield. Because you ever look at a battle, people
For
fighting
the
a battle, you got soldiers going out there that's fighting or whatever, and they come back and they get wounded, they go to the medic for healing. Now imagine the medic is fighting you too. How's that going to work? You know what I'm saying? You'll never be
they
able
don't work.
to be whole so you can go back out there and face that battle. So the home should never be a battlefield. If it is, something is wrong. Something has gone awry. Right?
There's no
There's
love.
no love, right?
Right. There's no love.
Because you can't draw
Right.
strength from a battlefield with an enemy that's trying to harm you. You cannot draw strength that way, right?
Correct.
You have to show strength, but you're not drawing strength. So once you understand that the home is not the battlefield, certain attitudes that you have, certain dispositions that you have when you're on the outside, you won't bring it in once you get into that corridor. Once you get into the corridor and you pass that portal of that doorway, you're going to leave it on the outside, right? Because you understand that you can only draw strength from looking over your home. But if your home is not the source of strength in order to look over it, then you will never be able to accomplish what you're seeking to do. So
Wow.
I'm going to give a couple of references to this literature that people can go back and look up themselves. But I said, okay, since the topic of this is sensuality and love, let me look at this literature and try to identify some things that we can take back with us, right? So the first thing is
Okay.
identifying the sensuality in the text. And it's all throughout the text. But I picked a couple of verses to help to outline that, right? So when we go to Song of Solomon and we go to chapter 1, the objective is of sensuality. Again, remember we read the definition. The definition is being able to satisfy or fulfilling the senses. So once that is
Okay.
accomplished, now you have a situation where you are beginning to establish a fervent connection with somebody else. Okay. And now when you look at these things through the
Okay.
senses, the text itself, if we go to Song of Solomon chapter 1, verse 2. So we go to Song of Solomon chapter 1, verse 2. I'm gonna grab it right now. It says, may he
Okay.
kiss me with the kisses of his mouth. So now we're dealing with touch, right? Touch in the sense of where this
Right.
person is because there's different ways to express love, and it's different with everybody, right? But sensuality typically tries to fulfill the senses via certain experiences in its immediate environment or with an immediate person, right, or object, right? So may he kiss me with
Right.
kisses. The text is letting you know that one of the elements of sensuality is touch, but touch that's not in a sexual fashion, but touch in a way of affection or outwardly affection, as far as a kiss is concerned,
Okay.
right? The next thing is the actual expression that's given is likened unto wine. And when you're able to taste wine, and at this time, that was one of the favorite beverages of the time. Fine wine was something that was highly valued. And even today, if you ever join like a wine and cheese group or wine cheese and crackers
Yes.
group, they teach you how to
Absolutely.
acquire a taste for certain wines so you can determine the value of those wines. So when you go to purchase it from the
Correct.
store, you know, okay, well, this one comes from this orchard, so I'm not going to get it from this wine orchard because I know that the environment in which they grow their grapes is not ideal. I know this brand typically likes to sell it cheap because they're only selling you wine that's only a year or 2 years old. This place right here allows it to ferment much
Correct.
longer. You're able to acquire these tastes for white, pink, or red wine, and you're able to determine via your senses what is rich, what is dull, what is worthy for you to consume or to indulge in. So when you are likening somebody's expression unto you to something that can compare to what you taste, now what you're doing is you're telling the mind that that wine that I like to drink, that I value so highly, this person, when I'm in their presence, it brings a sensation of wine to my taste buds. Now, this is something that's really deep, right? This
Mm.
is how you actualize something when you can train the mind to make. This is how children learn. Children learn through repetition, imitation, and association, right? Repetition, imitation, and association should be really association first, imitation, repetition. But these are three ways that children learn. And that type of learning does not stop. What tends to happen is we tend to put less value on that because as a child, you need that in order to mature. But a lot of times we get to a stage in life where we feel the maturation process has ceased and that it's done, right? So we have to continue to take
Right.
those elements and mature them so that way, because the presence of somebody reminds me of something that tastes so good to me that every time that I see
Wow.
them, it invigorates that sensation. So now you have the touch. So human to human contact, right? The body must stay at a peak temperature at all times. If it anytime it tries to deviate away from that, the body does what it can to maintain that core temperature. If you're in an environment and it's very hot, the body will sweat. And the sweat is a way for it to use the water through condensation in order to cool the body. If you're too cold, what the body will start doing is drawing away blood from the extremities and focusing it on to the vital organs in order to maintain a core temperature. So even if you do lose a finger, or if you do lose a foot or a hand or whatever, you will still be able to survive because your core organs will still be warm. The objective is that once you stay within that peak temperature, the body tries to maintain that peak temperature by attracting likeness. So when somebody makes physical contact with you, if you're at the optimal temperature and they're operating at the optimal temperature, there will be a gravitation or a connection that will be received because that person is generating the same amount of heat that your body typically operates from. And there's a median range, but it can go over the place, but it should be anywhere at 98 degrees, right? Your body should be operating internally at 98 degrees. So what touch
Okay.
does is that touch brings a sensation where the body can start to engage in certain things. You have electron transfer when that happens. There's actually even touching people is bacterial attraction as well because bacteria is rampant in our environment. And there's bacteria
Ooh.
that you may have and that somebody else may have, and these bacteria may try to colonize each other or come into conflict with each other, and you may not like the way a person touches you. Or a person, the
Correct.
coarseness of somebody's skin, or maybe the softness of somebody's skin, is not invigorating a sensation that is compatible with your skin sensory organ, which is comes from your nerves that then connects to everything else which comes to your mind. So if you get a touch from somebody and that touch is to a point where it satisfies you, because when you interact with it, it brings some degree of solace, it brings some degree of tranquility, some degree of arousal, right? And I'm not talking about sexual arousal. We ain't even getting sexual yet, but an arousal that
Right.
you feel, you've already satisfied the touch. When you associate them to taste, you've already satisfied taste, because now this is a way of really transforming the mind and creating new neurons, so that way this association, when it takes place, it can send a surge of electrical impulses in order to generate that sensation when you come into that person's presence. So when you elevate from that and you go into the smell aspect, which is in verse 3, and in verse 3 it says, your oils have a pleasing fragrance. The body produces natural oils, right? The skin does. You have the sebaceous gland. The sebaceous gland, it secretes oils that come out of where your hair follicles grow from. And those sebaceous glands secretes an oil, and that oil has a scent or an odor. The times where it becomes very pungent is when there's a colonization of bacteria that makes the smell very unpleasant. But when the bacteria is not colonizing and the skin is doing what it needs to do to buffer the colonization of the bacteria, now the sebaceous glands can produce oils that now emits an odor that is odorless because you're not aware of the odor, but then it transforms into what's called a pheromone. And a pheromone is something that a lot of animals in a primitive state that they use in order for survival techniques, mates, how to find certain mates, how to find territories that's been marked with urine, because you also have pheromones in urine. But with humans, we emit pheromones. And a lot of times what tends to happen is you'll have a misalignment of two people because the pheromone is imbalanced. And there's various ways through diet, through exercise, other ways that you can kind of balance or stabilize those pheromones. But sometimes they're naturally occurring no matter what you do. And if a person is not turned off by your natural odor that is not afflicted by bacterial colonization, then there will be a degree of a sensory illumination that a person would then be attracted towards. So what we tend to do is we tend to find other oils and perfumes, because a lot of these oils and perfumes that we get are pheromones that are used by plants or by animals. You notice that a lot of the cologne that you wear or a lot of the body sprays you wear, they have uric acid in it. That's derived from animals. Right. Why? Because that is the pheromones. That what we're doing is we are retraining the brain to acknowledge that these pheromones are more valuable than the natural pheromones that we secrete through ourselves. And this becomes very difficult because now we start to place a higher value on the oils that are in our environment as opposed to the oils with ourselves. But when we start to retrain the brain that the pheromones of this individual is likened unto the things that I trained my brain previously to identify as being pleasurable, which in this sense, it could be a fragrance. Now what you're doing, again, you're retraining the brain to identify this person's natural pheromones to your nose, and you're likening unto a fragrance that either they may start to wear, and then every time you're in their presence, you automatically associate that oil with them, or even in the absence of that oil, because you've already conditioned your mind on receiving this person based on smell, and it becomes subconscious. Now you tend to become more receptive of this person's presence, right? So, and people call that biochemistry, right? Because that's what pheromones is. It's a form of biochemistry, right? On how two things attract, two things repel each other. It also goes to physics as well. But the text itself is, again, it's a way of retraining the consciousness to identify things that it has value with based on its physiological makeup and what it needs for survival. The reason why human beings create lifelong bonds is because it's a means of survival, but not survival in a state of struggle, but survival in a state that if I encounter struggle, I have something that will keep me afloat. So now once you're able to deal with the first elements of sensuality, which is touch, which is taste, which is smell, the next thing is hearing. When you go to verse 7, you go Song of Solomon, chapter 1, verse 7, It says, tell me
Okay.
whom my soul loves, where you pasture your flock. So now the next thing is a method of inquiry that only comes through hearing, right? And you know, the way that hearing happens is that you have small cilia or hairs that are in your ear, then you have an eardrum, and then you have nerves and you have membranes in there, and which vibrations from the air ripple through into the canal. That's it's funneled into the canal. It goes into the eardrum. It is sensation is received by the hairs, and then you interpret that. So what you want to do is you want to be in a state of inquiry. The best way to remember what you hear is to always be in an inquisitive state of inquiry, right? You always want to
Mm.
ask questions, and not just the same mundane questions, but questions that permeate beyond what we are daily thinking about every day. And when we give out these things and when we receive these are things again starts to illuminate the sensory organ that every time I'm around this person, there's a type of inquiry that I want to receive from them that tends to start fulfilling my ears to the point where their words start to become like notes from a song that I love, you know, or becomes notes on a piano or
Oh my
strings on a
God.
guitar when they speak. Because what music
Mm.
does is that music pries open the elements of you that want to be questioned, the mysterious parts of you that want to be expressed, that want to be free, that wants to be liberated. And when you can liken a person's words and the tone of their voice and their mannerisms and how they project what they say, now what you're doing is you're retraining the mind to open yourself up to inquiries. Because a lot of times, you know, you hear women that say, not women, but an old cliche would be, oh, you shouldn't ask a woman what her height is, and not her height, her weight, excuse me, her age and things of that
Right.
nature.
Age.
But because those are things that are deemed to be sacred. That's the inner temple of you that you don't just let anybody in, right? Because it's personal and it's
Right.
private. But what tends to happen is when you get to a point where your sensory organ of hearing is activated and receptive, you are open to inquiry, and there is no limitations because now you're
Mm.
allowing somebody to sail on uncharted waters that just anybody can get into. And this is why the element of
Oh
hearing
my
is also important by
God.
retraining the consciousness to associate the things that you are already likened to loving to a certain degree and objects that are not human. And now you're associating that with a person, where once you start to retrain your mind, you'll
Ooh.
start to then value people over objects. But because we're in an environment that teaches us or trains us to value objects over people because of the oppressive system that we are placed in and how they were surviving, once we're able to rearrange it and relate man to man or person to person, then we can start changing the game. But first, in order to do that, we first must use association. So once we elevate from hearing and we move past hearing, the next level that we need to go into is sight. So and what tends to happen in society is we human beings rely on sight more than anything else. And it's fortunate and
Right.
unfortunate. It's unfortunate because the way that we are designed, the strongest muscle or memory muscle is not your organ, is not your eyes, right? It's really your scent. Smelling comes first. And the reason why, because it
Ooh.
goes back to pheromones. When you're a baby and a mother gives birth to a child, when the mother starts to lactate, that lactation sends
Yes,
a
ma'am.
pheromone signal. And I got a scientific article I wanted to show on that. It sends that signal out to the child that the child uses its scent or smelling in order to find the nipple, not its sight. It uses its scent. And then once the scent drives it towards the place of contact, now it uses its taste, the taste buds to receive it. And at the same time, it's hearing its mother calling to it at the same time. So now you got the nose
Right.
first, you got the taste. And sometimes as you're getting, you know, acclimated with the taste and the scent, then you start to hear the mother's voice because the child hears the mother's voice reverberate in the womb while she is pregnant. So the child already
Yeah.
can recognize the mother's
Yo.
voice, but the mother's voice is not enough for survival. It is also looking for that nipple so it can feed and it can get sustainability and sustenance. So the sight is never the
Yes.
first object. Some babies are born with their eyes open, some babies are born with their eyes closed, but all babies
That's right.
cannot get sustenance from sight. You get it from the scent that drives you to the taste, that then you associate with the words that you hear. Then when you're able to open your eyes and actually see, you associate with the sight. And then the touch comes along with that. Because again, the way that the mother is designed is so that her touch is compatible with the baby. The first thing they tell all the time, and I learned this from a home birth, personal home birth, where they always say that the baby also must make contact with the mother. A lot of times babies have issues with latching on. It's because the mother never embraces the child when the child is first born.
Correct.
A lot of times they force the child onto the nipple, and that's not correct because the child was in an environment, the amniotic fluid in the womb of the mother, where it's being protected and its temperature is being regulated. When it's outside the womb, now the body's fighting to regulate temperature, and the way it stabilizes that is when skin-to-skin contact is met. And once that's done and the body can stabilize itself, now naturally, as the mother starts to lactate, the baby through scent will gravitate towards that direction, and through taste, it will take it in. It's hearing its mother speaking because things are going on when the child is first born. And then lastly is the sight. Unfortunately, we're in a society that trains us that your sight is more important than anything else. And that's unfortunate.
And it's not.
It's not.
That's right. And I just want to just chime in real quick, Divine, because you're speaking on the level of science. And so I want to piggyback on what you just said about the baby, because I would always feel that it was spiritual because I go from a spiritual sense. But when I breastfed my daughter, I would notice how when she started to twitch a little because she was hungry, I would literally feel my breast filling up. I mean, it was almost like she was in some way communicating with my body, me unknowing. And my body and her were communicating. And that's how I knew she was hungry. Even if I wasn't in the same room, even when I went to work and I would feel my breast, she would be communicating from a distance.
Because what starts to happen, your body operates on a circadian rhythm or a biological clock. And what happens is, as the mother is sending these signals to the child and the child responds, now the mother becomes receptive to the signals from the child. And there's a mutual need for one another in order for survival. Because when a child is born, there's birth pains, but after the child is here, the child then reflects joy back to the mother, and then encourages the mother to continue to sustain the child so that the joy is reflected back to the mother. And it's a continuous cycle. And now your biological clock and the baby's biological clock are then synchronized. So this is why you can feel things from a child and a child can feel things from a mother. But in our society, because society has put so much emphasis on sight, they've missed the human experience. So this is why I put sight at the end of the list, and conveniently, it's later on in the literature itself as well, which I'm thinking is this is the ancestors who created this, was conveying this message to us via the Ruach or the Spirit. And the sight is the last thing in regards to sensuality. And if we deregulate the sight from being the priority, then we'll see that our experience as human beings would skyrocket, right? So just to sum up this portion of sensuality and then get into the element of love, my battery is getting a little low, but I'm gonna plug it in a few minutes. I don't want it to die because I'm trying to go in. So the last sense is sight, right? So when we go to Song of Solomon's and we go to verse, let me grab it real quick. We go to verse, let's just down. There we go. We go to verse 15, and 15 starts to go to sight. And it says, "How beautiful you are, my darling." So in order for you to acknowledge beauty, it has to be compared to something that you have an intrinsic understanding or association to what beauty is. So in this sense, it says, "Your eyes are like doves," right? So if you ever took time to watch a dove was a very prized animal in this culture. And you were to watch a dove, the things that a dove does is so gentle. The things that a dove does is so elegant. The thing that a dove does is just so, it's effortless in how it performs things. And it's so small. And it's so like, wow, this small creature is doing things that is so magnificent. that when you see somebody and you gaze into their eyes, looking into their eyes as one of many features that the text goes into, because it starts with other parts of the body, but it starts first with the eyes, because the eyes are the windows to the soul. And we say all the time with the cliche, beauty is in the eye of the beholder. So what happens is when a
Yes.
person then becomes appealing based on sight, appealing based on sight. Now you're making an association with what you perceive of that person, because a person is just a bunch of matter, a bunch of cells that's put together. But in society, you're taught that most people who are beautiful because you have a degree of symmetry in their facial features and bodily features, right? And when people are more asymmetrical, they're not as beautiful. And this is a science behind, perceiving what beauty is. And then also, as you raise a person in an environment where you're showing them images of what beauty is, and you are associating those images to words, now they have a understanding of what that is. And what tends to happen is it cannot be reflected intrinsically, naturally, because you are training this child what beauty is. Instead of looking into the environment, instead of looking into their own people, sometimes people are looking at another standard to identify what beauty is. And that is
For beauty.
a big error. Okay. So the point I'm trying to make is the eyes are the windows to the soul. And when a person is able to fixate their eyes on you and you on them, and you're able to liken what you see to an object of beauty in your environment, now you have satisfied the visual aspect. And a lot of times people say, oh, some people say, looks don't matter. Some people say looks do matter. I say looks do matter, but what happens is we put too much emphasis on looks, and you lose the substance in the process because you're being attracted to vanity, right? So that's why I say if you go through the other senses when you encounter someone, and then you line up the visual to complement those additional senses based on how we are naturally brought into this world, you'll start to perceive life from a totally different perspective that will blow your mind, right? So once we transition from sensuality, now once you've satisfied all these senses and made these associations with these senses to a person whose presence that you're in, now what happens is once these things peak, a lot of people tend to just stop there and just satisfy their lust, right? And that becomes a problem because what you're yearning for is not lust. Lust is a byproduct. And it's okay to lust, which means a strong desire towards. And if the lust is misdirected, it becomes an inordinate affection towards something, okay? So lust is just a strong desire that is necessary when it's within the proper confines, okay? And it also needs to be stabilized. It needs to be disciplined because unbridled lust can cause issues, right? But what happens is people don't realize that once they satisfy all those senses, the body is yearning for something that society tells you is sex, when the spirit tells you it is love. Okay, it is the desire to want to bring a degree of nurturement or nurturing or consolement to somebody else by several principles that then become manifested. And this is why typically, before you enter into a sexual contract, you should fulfill those five senses with the ideal mate, and then get to a point where you're able to fulfill the sixth sense, which is love, which I'm about to explain. And then from there, that will tell you, if you can get to that point, will tell you whether or not you should engage into the sexual act with that person, okay? And a lot of times what we like to do as human beings is put contracts on things so we can ensure that this experience is lifelong, right? But it's not what you get, it's what you can keep. And I got that from Lauryn Hill. She said it in a song. It's not what you can get, it's what you can keep. Because you have people that's bragging all the time. Oh, I can get this man, or I can get this girl, but can you keep them? And you see that they're never able to keep what they get. And if they were in the wild and we were living off the land, they can be able to catch a lot of fish, but they don't know how to cut the fish up so they can eat it. They can catch a lot of fruits, but they don't know how to break the fruit open in order to eat the substance inside. You can get and accumulate things, But if you don't learn discipline on how to keep it, then you acquiring it does not mean anything. And then we see this also with celebrities that accumulate all this money, but then 5, 6, 7 years down the line, they bankrupt because they don't know how to invest. How you keep something is based on how you invest in that thing, not what you do to get it, but what you invest to keep it. And people typically with their human interactions, they do not prioritize investment. They prioritize sensuality in a sense where it turns sexual, but it never becomes an investment. Right. The investment typically fulfills a animal urge, because we can classify it as animals, an animal urge to procreate. And what happens is that method of procreation then becomes prioritized higher than the investment that must be made after the procreation commences. Because the purpose of procreation is that the probability is that a child will come forth. Now, a lot of people like to engage in sex and don't want to have children. That's understandable. We all like, but if we focus on the procreation element that is primitive in us, that comes from our animalistic instincts, and if that is what we are investing in, then once we produce something out of that act, there is no follow-up investment to nurture what was then produced. Therefore, there becomes a degree of resentment toward the thing that was produced, because now what it does is that it forces you into a state of responsibility that you previously was not set up or designed for, because you have not been put in a disposition by those who are raising you, those in your immediate environment, your cultural values, to say, when you get to the point of procreation, you can only do that if what you're procreating with and who you're procreating with also is looking for a long-term investment to ensure that what the return is, which is that child, continues to increase value based on what you put into it. And you're only going to put the best resources in something that you see has the greatest value, that's going to continue to perpetually bring you yield that will ensure that you are successful. Now, again, I know this is a lot, but again, it's necessary. So when we climax and get to the point where now we're feeling this intense feeling of affection, that is supposed to awaken or activate your spirit or your ruach to now do its part. The intentions are the senses or the sensory fulfillment, but the motive is the element of love or the sixth sense that's driving everything, because that driver is looking for those sensual or sensory organs to be fulfilled so that it then can do its part and it can draw strength or add strength to that sixth sense, so that way that can ensure that this is a lifelong bond. Now we get to the point of love. So to finish off what I'm saying in a nutshell, the last element is love. So we see that we have this intense feeling in regards to sensuality, right? Now it brings us to Song of Solomon, chapter 5, verse 4. And chapter 5, verse 4 expresses this intense feeling of love, right? So we're gonna get into it, right? And it says here, my beloved extended his hand through the opening, and my feelings were aroused. That means something was put out. Like when you are helping somebody, they say, lend a hand, right? So you lend a hand. So when the person sees that this person is lending or extending something from them to this person, you're creating a bridge, because the objective of you putting your hand out is for somebody else to clasp that hand so that there's a bridge connection between you and that person, right?
And that person.
Are you still there? So then when you collapse to that, now this feeling now becomes satisfied, because now the feeling is aroused, and that feeling is that intense feeling of affection that you just want to express towards that person, because the sensory organs have been fulfilled appropriately, and now you're climaxed to a point where now the spirit or the love element needs its gratification, and now once you see the extension of somebody's essence towards you, and you open up your hand to welcome them, to clap, to create that bridge. Now, when that love is activated, it brings you to the next stages. And I'm going to keep this real simple. The second one is that of affirmation. Affirmation is an open declaration of commitment. This is deep, because a lot of times people try not to claim people when they want to play around. When you're not trying to play around, you are very ardent in how you openly claim an individual, right? Now, sometimes people may concede certain elements of that connection because they need it to be private. You can't put everything out on Front Street. But at the same time, you never deny your attraction, your commitment, and the extension of the essence of who you are with somebody else when you get to that point of realization that this is something that is beyond what the five senses can. So the affirmation part goes into Song of Solomon chapter 6 verse 5. So we go to chapter 6 and we go to verse 5. It says, wait, hold on, that's the wrong verse. Verse 6 verse 3, excuse me, chapter 6 verse 3. It says, I am my beloved's and my beloved is mine. So now the affirmation is going out, and I'm gonna read the definition of affirmation. This is important, so that way we know when we are reaching these milestones, how deep that is getting in regards to this thing that we call love. All right. So affirmation is a formal declaration by a person. And the reason why they take this formal declaration is because they want the thing that they are affirming to be its support system. And the reason why you do this affirmation openly is because the thing that you're affirming is what's providing you support. So when you say, I am my beloved and my beloved is mine, you are treating that individual as if they are a vital organ in your body, as if they are a necessary element for you to survive in your environment. So the affirmation is made once the arousal of that sixth sense is accomplished. And then that brings you to the next stage. And I'm going to just go to verse 10 real quick to close off affirmation. And verse 10 says, who is that I think I got the wrong verse again. Excuse me for that. I don't know why I got the wrong verse again. But 3, we're going to leave it at 3. 3 was good. Let's go to verse 7 and 10. 7 and 10 will get you to another point of affirmation. So when you go to Song of Solomon chapter 7, verse 10, it says, again, I am my beloved's. Why? Because his desires is for me. So this is how you understand love. Love is not just your desires for the person, but ensuring that that person also has the same desires for you. Because if your desire and their desire are 2 different wavelengths, it is no sustainability with that connection. Are you there?
Yes.
Okay, I just want to make sure
I
this is
can
cutting out a
see
little bit. Okay, cool. So understanding that it has to be a reciprocity involved. That I desire this person because they desire me equally as much. Now the affirmation is solidified. Once you transgress past this affirmation, the next part is verse 12 in chapter 7, which deals with self-sacrifice in the form of giving. Okay, self-sacrifice in the form of giving, and that's verse 12, which says, "Let us rise early, go to the vineyards. Let us see whether the vine has budded, its blossom has opened, and whether the pomegranate has bloomed. There I will give you my love, because now love is likened unto things budding, things blossoming, and things blooming." If somebody is not bringing productivity and increase and construction into your life, there's no need for you to be affiliated with them, because that is the core of what love is, right? And this is why they wanted to go into an area where there is fruit that is blossoming and blooming and that's budding, because it shows growth. And with that growth, it then can produce more fruit that will then continue to sustain the cycle of growth. So when you get to self-sacrifice, where you're willing to give you somebody something that you've nourished within yourself, that you've cherished within yourself, that has not been eaten by anybody else, and you want to ensure that this will continue to drive productivity in that relationship, that is when you get to almost the final stage. And the last stage comes from chapter 8, verse 6. Okay, excuse me, I got my notes a little jungled up here, so that's why I was missing a few verses, but I got it now. Hit the home run right now, all right? So hit the home run right now. Let me go to verse 6, and verse 6 says, "Put me like a signet ring over your heart, like a seal on your arm. For love is as strong as death. Jealousy is as severe
Mm.
as the grave. It flashes or flashes of fire, and the very flame is from the Creator. Now you get to a point where you're moving up this hierarchy of needs, up this pyramid, right? And now you get to the point of self actuality where you realize that now I can actualize things. In order for me to sustain what I achieved, now what I must do is I must ensure a degree of perpetuity. And I'm gonna read perpetuity
Mm.
for you, and after that I'm done. I definitely would love to hear some of your feedback on it. But
Oh my God.
perpetuity is important. It is a bond or other security with no fixed maturity date. Let me explain what that means. If your bond
Ah.
has a maturity date on it, then it's not going to last the long run. When you get to a point when you feel you've outgrown the other person, that relationship is dead in the water. It is not going to go anywhere. But when you are willing to
Mm.
create a bond or a means of security and that connection with that person, what you're doing is you're saying that this connection will forever be one that will never fully mature in the sense of being fixed by limits. There's no ceiling. And the sky is not even the
Oh my
limit
God.
because the sky is only things that you can see, but the real outer limits is that which is inside, right? So it's a seal, it's a signet. Signet is a ring that you place on a ring finger when you get married to ensure that a cycle, a circle is going to continue to be perpetual, and this connection that you have with this person not going anywhere. And again, placing a ring on the middle finger on the left hand, that actually comes from medieval times. But the reason why it's placed is because, again, remember superstition or folk tales and so forth, it's believed that in that ring finger, the strongest nerves that go right to the heart are in that ring finger. So the reason why they're placing that ring on that finger is because it's supposed to symbolize a perpetual or circular cycle of love, devotion, commitment that drives straight to the central essence of what a person is. But when we go back to our indigenous culture, you don't really need a ring on a finger to symbolize that because people get divorced all the time. That signet has to be placed on the spirit of the person, which is the driving force on how that individual operates. And with that, I'm done. And you got to always give them a license now for them to travel in and out of you. And when I say license, and I'm not talking about marriage license, I'm talking about a commitment that is beyond what can be imagined or envisioned by the human sensory organs. And once you are able to place a ring on that, then that perpetuity, where it has no fixed maturity date, and that you will continue to grow forever and forever until the ends of time, then you know you've achieved
Oh
something
my
because now you've
God.
come to a state where now strength can be drawn so you can look over that person and the things that you and that person produce, which would be the next generation, that needs to be raised up with these same values in order for them to be successful in their generation despite what they may encounter. And with that, I'm done.
Oh, you know
And
what?
I'm gonna let you talk. Just
You
give me
just
1 second. I'm gonna go grab my charger, but I'm gonna let you talk. I'll be right back.
do it. Okay. Family, tell me he didn't I tell you it was going to be worth the wait? Didn't I tell you it was going to be worth the wait? And this is why I've been so patient. You don't know how long I waited to be able to get Divine Prospect and get his time, because when you ask him a question, he going to go to the root of it, to the essence, to the foundation, and build you right up to a complete and total understanding slash overstanding, because we can now take it and actually apply it to our life. It doesn't just go in one ear and out the other. You can apply everything that he just said. So, King, you ready?
Ready for?
Because you just did marriage and relationship counseling via Facebook Live. And I mean, you just blew my mind, because what I realize is that a lot of our relationships are over before they begin, because number one, we put a date on it. And when I say a date on it, we're looking for a wedding. We're looking for you to say you my man today. And I say, I'm your girl today. We skip the whole sensuality piece. We skip the whole, does my body and your body, do we mix well? The sound of your voice, does it illuminate anything in me? Does it make me want to be better when I see you, when I'm in your presence? Does it make me feel good? Does it bring me to a place of healing and reconciliation and observance and awareness? We miss all of that. We put a maturity date on it, and it's over before it actually began.
Exactly. Wow. Mm-hmm.
I don't even know where to. Does anybody have any questions? I don't know. I know family, they blowed up. I mean, because I was looking at the comments, and people are just like, they can't. I mean, okay. Okay, let's start from, you started at sensuality, which I'm glad that you did. And I love the fact, because when I was asked what sensuality was, I started with the 5 basic senses. It's smell, taste, touch. So that just affirmed to me that I was on the right track with that. That definitely it starts there, and then you develop into other senses are created from that, intuition and things of that nature. So you broke that down. But it was one thing I wanted to touch on that you had said, dealing with the Song of Solomon. You went through the senses and then you actually got to love, but you said something about the bacteria.
Oh, yeah.
And so you said something about
the pheromones.
Right. And how, because our bodies, when we're mixing sweat, saliva, semen,
and I was going to get into that, but I'm going to let you take that somewhere. That's deep. I was going to get into that, but go ahead. Yeah. I feel where you at. I feel you.
I was going to say, yeah. Because sometimes when you're having sex, and I want to say it's premature because you have not established those senses. Had you gone through those senses, you probably would have known that you're not compatible there. But you didn't take the time to go through those senses. And so sometimes when we're having sex, especially as women, we develop like a bacterial infection. And that bacterial infection is because we're just simply not compatible with that particular mate. And we have jumped to lust. We have not even examined the whole sensuality part of it. We haven't gone through the process of building our immune system, because it almost sounds to me, the way you were breaking each one down, that if you go through the process properly and holistically, that it actually builds your immune system. So when you get to that point to consummate your feelings, your body is strong and capable, and his body is strong and capable. Am I on the right track?
Go ahead. You got it.
I mean, you were blowing my mind, like you were blowing. And then I love how you went through the process, because a lot of times in relationships, you don't know where you're at. So you actually broke down the process where you can literally observe at what point in that sensuality, is it really leading to love or not? The affirmation, the sound of the voice. If he doesn't even want to hear the sound of your voice, or you don't want to hear the sound of his voice, it's not going to lead to love. If you can't communicate with one another, meaning that he is not in a position where he wants to open up and share with you and be vulnerable, and vice versa, then you're never going to get to that particular place that you're looking for, which is essentially love. Am I on the right track?
Go ahead. You got it. You just putting the cherry on top.
Okay. I'm breaking it down because you're so intellectual. So I got to break it down to all my family members like me. You got to break it down like we 5 years old, so we get it. So it sounds to me that we really need to take more time evaluating instead of looking for, because in most cases people are looking for a wedding, they're looking for the ceremony, or they're looking for the title, rather than taking the time to see, smell, taste, touch, understand, enjoy the other person's presence, what the other person brings to them, into their intellect, into their spirit. So it sounds like we need to take more time, is what you're saying, because one of the things you kept saying, and for me not to run on and talk, you kept saying, I'm sorry it's taken me so long to get to the point. I'm sorry it's taken, but really, no, we don't realize the amount of work and the amount of time that it takes in order to fully develop sensuality, and the amount of time it takes to actually get to love.
Exactly.
And I was trying to post one thing. I was post while you were talking, the Song of Solomon. I didn't realize it was so doggone long. But then I realized that, of course, it's so long because it takes time in order to be sensual and in order to love another person. That's all
There
I
you
want to
go.
say.
That's beautiful.
My mind.
That's beautiful, man. And I thank you for inviting me to this show, because I've never fully taught from this angle before. And I knew there was some.
Oh, no. You know what? I bet it was the system that kind of took him off, took Divine off, that his battery is dying. It may have died on us, family. So I'll try to get in touch with him. I know he's got a million things to do. He's doing so many things. I'll make sure that I post the link. He's going to be running for office, and I was going to tell Divine that whatever he needs. Oh, you're back? Okay. Let me see if I can't get you on. Let's see if it'll let me. Let's see. I want you to know, King, that I'm going to work on your campaign. I don't care if it's making copies, knocking on doors. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, so you cut off when you were saying, which I'm so grateful for you to even say that you had never taught from this perspective.
Yeah, I never publicly talk. Some of these things I share via counseling sessions, but I've never publicly came out and shared a lot of these type of details with the community. So I knew there was going to be something special about the subject matter, because I know I wanted to take an angle that is unorthodox, and one that people are not expecting, to really bring the essence of what it is that we're talking about. So that's why I wanted to talk about romanticism before we transition into the more indigenous way of understanding what love is. Once we go through sensuality. And I want to thank you, Stacy, for inviting me and having enough confidence and faith that I would do my best on the show.
You did it.
Because I only want to grace the things that you host with the utmost excellence, because that is what you strive for. So quality is what you should yield in return. So I'm just grateful to the Creator that I'm able to contribute that. And I hope that what we shared can benefit those who are watching, and even after this show ends, for generations to come, because these are timeless principles. There's no time that it can only work. Human beings are timeless individuals. No matter what environment we're in, we're still going to express the same human emotions, the human's perceptions, et cetera, et cetera. So once we're able to take these gems and put it in a storage and keep these things to take out when we need it, or when we need to give to somebody else, we will continue to perpetually be an example that's leaving a legacy behind for others who are not getting it right, to learn how to do things appropriately. And we have that obligation as leaders in our community to ensure that when somebody is not doing something appropriately, not to shun them, not to disrespect them, not to ridicule them, but take time aside and to empathize where they're at, because we've all been in that state at one point, and then work with them from the ground up. Because if we don't work from the ground up, we work from the top down, then we're overlooking them in their situation.
That's right.
We work from the ground up, we're right in the grassroots trying to sprout out with them, in the dirt with them, until they blossom, until they bloom, until they're able to bear fruit. And this is the type of love that we can then extend to each other when we understand that we are all we got. And I just
Woo.
want to end it off simple as that. We heard that cliche before. Family, we all
We
we got.
all we got.
And that's what it is. You know, we all we got.
Thank
You know
you
what I'm
so much.
saying? So,
Yes. Well, I will tell you that you saved me from making a mistake. You saved me. I just want to tell you
oh,
that.
praise the Most High.
Yes, you
Yeah,
saved me.
I'm grateful for that.
Yes. And so with that, I know that you have to go and change the world, but I want to tell you that when you're ready to run for office, I don't care what it is. If you need somebody to clean the windows, I clean very well. I can make copies. I can sweep the floor. I can go door to door. But I want you to know that I want to be there and be a part of making certain that you win. Not just the nomination, but the actual seat, because you are exactly what the community needs in order to
Thank you,
progress. So
sis.
I'm here to work. It don't matter what it is. And it don't have to be no top. It could be answering the phone. It could be, like I said, give me a broom. I clean very well. I don't mind. All right, I got
Awesome.
you.
I'm honored to hear that, sis. Thank you so much. And like I mentioned earlier, reciprocity is the order of the day. So if you also need the same assistance to get your projects and events and the campaigns off the ground, let me know as well. My resources are your resources. It's like your resources are my resources.
Yes.
And the objective is not just for each other, but it's for everybody else who can't do what we are able to do, and to empower them to do the same. You know, because I tell people all the time, you're not successful without successors, and your success is dependent upon those around you and how successful they are. So if you're the only successful person and everybody else is not, that's questionable.
Correct.
You know, it's a self-centered success, and that never really has a strong legacy. And something that is prized from people of color. You know, when we unlearn what we've been taught and learn how to place the right value on things that actually mean something, then we'll start to perceive our reality differently, and then we'll start to really appreciate one another. And with that, I want to send blessings and love to you, sis. I want to give thanks to everybody that watched this show live. And if you're not watching it live, you're going to watch the rerun of it. And I'm telling you, there's a bunch of nuggets that we both shared that you can use in any element of your life. So we love you, family. I love you. Much love and respect. Please support my sister, Stacy Douglas, and her foundation. She is making a lot of moves in her community out there in South Carolina and the conscious community. When you go to her channel, she's meeting all people and interviewing them and talking to them and, you know, extracting information and wisdom. And I mean, follow her. She's a very interesting personality. Because a lot of times I'll watch people and they just not interesting. You know, you make things very interesting, you make things very fun and very engaging. And as a lively people, that is what we need in order for us to continue to fixate our sight and our hope towards something that can give us what we call soul. That can make us feel alive again.
Yes.
You know, so continue to express that energy. Let it permeate through your pores. Let it hit everybody else. Let it be contagious. And I'll do my part to do the same. And I'm telling you, we're going to create a ripple effect in that small lake that's going to touch and affect everything that is encompassed in it.
I receive it. Peace, King.
Peace, sis.